So I'm super excited to be here at Sibos this year, the biggest financial banking industry conference for infrastructure in the world. And I'm joined here by really some of the most advanced team leaders in the digital asset industry. We have Nadine, who is leading digital assets at DTCC, Stéphanie, who's leading digital assets at Euroclear, and John, who is the head of strategy for Swift, who has a very strong and deep role in the digital asset strategy of Swift. I'm really thrilled to be working with all three of these great folks and learning from them and seeing how they view the capital markets. They've always had a lot of insight, in my experience, about what's going to happen in the capital markets. So I thought it'd be great for them to share their views on the new corporate actions lifecycle management phase 2 that we've done together with all of them, and what that means for the capital markets industry and the blockchain industry really coming together. I think the questions are pretty straightforward. I think it'd be useful for folks to understand about why it's important for all market participants to be going off of the same data, in this case, corporate actions data. So Nadine, I think we'll start with you. Why is that important for all market participants?
So corporate actions has always been the biggest headache that we've had in the industry, whether you're a custodian, you're a user, you're a depository. And it has been the fragmentation of the data. It's been the complexity of how you interpret corporate actions to be able to process them properly. A bad corporate action has really very difficult consequences for all involved. So the data, at least a nice golden source of the data, at least gets us all to start at the same level. Now, there's always subject to interpretation. There's still a lot of fragmentation in a lot of manual processing. But the data, or good, clean data, is the first step, if you will, to help us push forward with automation, better control, better standardization. So it's something that impacts every single user in the industry.
Yeah, completely agree. Having a single source of information is something everyone should.
It's been the holy grail, right? Like, we've never been able to achieve it. We've always had the ambition as an industry, but haven't been able to achieve it on global scale.
Yeah. I think that's really the potential of blockchains and Oracle networks and smart contracts. Is it allows a new place where you can achieve some of these things that weren't historically achievable in the current system.
But maybe we have been working on corporate action standardization for a very long time, and there is, and John can talk about that, but there is standard with Swift and a way to normalize the data. But despite the existence of this kind of standard, we can see that all the intermediaries in the value chain are still using them in a different manner, have their own business rules and the way to interpret them, which is still creating this fragmentation. So data standard, the way is already there for a long time and a big elephant in the room. And then what smart contracts and blockchain will bring is also the standardization of the business process and the way we will use them across the value chain. So that's really interesting to see in that context as well.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of great work to already standardize. And I think this second phase is really building on that great work in joining the existing work with what blockchains are capable of. So you also feel that having a single record is important.
Yes, having a single record is important, and the value, I think, was demonstrated during this second phase. And even if you remember last year, we were pushing the phase 1, and it was on a few number of participants, and the number of participants that came this year to work with us and collaborate and see how we could bring this kind of new efficiency to the market. It's impressive, and it shows the traction and the interest and the value that it can solve for the industry. So yes, it's important.
Yeah, there's definitely been an increase in the amount of participants from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 1 I think had about 10, maybe 10 to 12 participants, and it's more than doubled for phase 2 with over 24 participants, now including the DTCC and 6 and other great organizations. So I was personally very surprised the level of interest in solving this problem, because I was unaware of it. But once we started to get going, the level of interest in having corporate actions work properly is actually immense. So John, how do you feel about there being a single golden record that the industry can rely on for corporate actions?
Yeah, it's one of these things that everybody thinks is a good idea, but nobody dares to take the responsibility to build a golden record, because the liabilities of saying I have the single version of the truth, it's very dangerous, right? Because remember that corporate actions is data that especially asset managers, they take investment decisions. If you get it wrong, the problems are huge, right? So I think what we see now is that by using blockchain networks and AI together, then there is this hope that building this golden record could be, because of the native capabilities of a blockchain, that it is basically a single version of the truth, that people will dare to start talking more about golden source. If you used to talk about golden source maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, people will say like, don't touch that. Nobody wants to build that. Nobody wants to maintain it. I think now that's changing, and that's what maybe will do what is going to be the missing piece of the puzzle.
Right. So you're basically saying that it was very difficult to build a single authoritative
Correct.
golden source of truth.
Correct.
And then getting it wrong has very large consequences.
Correct.
And so, it was such a, I guess what you were saying is that it was such an intractable problem.
Correct.
That when people 5 or 10 years ago brought it up and said, hey, I can give you a single validated golden source about this, for example, corporate actions topic, it was such an intractable problem that people, didn't even want to engage. But now what you're seeing is that Oracle networks, together with AI, together with blockchain networks, have a good chance of solving the problem.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's still a tricky thing, but I do think that it's something that, because it's a very old problem that nobody has found a solution that is sustainable, it is a problem that is worth trying to solve it now with technology that it's capable of doing it.
Yeah. There's definitely new technology that we can apply. I think blockchains are a good place to put the record. Oracle networks are a good way to validate the record, and combining all this is only possible now with these technologies. But let's talk through that. Let's chat through how this was all done. From your point of view, Nadine, what is the most exciting part of this from a technical point of view? What are the things that are innovative here that was able to be achieved?
So the technology part is, I think, the most exciting component, but I also want to make sure that both the points that Stéphanie and John brought up, there's an element of standardization of that data, and attestation itself is probably not enough. Like, we've got to, because there's two types of data, right? Like, there's the data that you can aggregate via the big models, but there's still a level of oversight that needs to occur, because to your point, not only are fund managers taking investment decisions on that, but investors are using it to, that's how we strike the NAV of a fund, and there's financial consequences to that. But to your question, Sergey, I think the technology itself, being able to access that data, to be able to write smart contracts, to use the data schemas, which I believe was DTCC's contribution, us putting our technology to the benefit of the market, to be able to leverage your infrastructure to do that. We can do things today that we weren't able to do even 18 months ago, right? And corporate action, as they both mentioned too, is a function that's benefited from a lot of investment over the years. But it's been one of these things where, where we've never been able to get a big bang for the buck, if you will, as we move forward. So this is going to help us get better at certain things that we do manually. I don't know yet, and there could be different opinions. I don't know yet if it's like set it and forget it. I think there's still work that the depositories and the issuers will need to do. But giving us a platform to be able to reduce a lot of that manual intervention and fragmentation, for me, is the most exciting part. And being able to leverage oracles and smart contracts to be able to do that work is exciting. A good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there's definitely a need for standards that the financial community can come and organize themselves around. Those standards then need to be fed with, as John made it clear, reliable, validated data, right? So you can have the standards, but then the data going into the standard needs to be accurate, right, for it to be useful. And I absolutely see a very big role for organizations like the DTCC, Euroclear, Swift, to set those on-chain standards for how the corporate action record is defined. And I personally think it'll be different maybe by region, right? So there'll be something for US equities, there'll be something for Europe, might be something for Asia. So you'll have a kind of on-chain, as you said, schema and a way to define how the corporate action is standardized across the financial community. But then you also need to make sure that the corporate action is updated correctly, and then also that the corporate action on a single chain is reliably connected across all the chains. So I think those are the three problems.
I would agree. I think it's also important to acknowledge, because there's old timers like us watching this, they'll be sitting here rolling their eyes going like, what are these people talking about? There's over 60 to 70 different corporate action types. There's stuff that's very frequent that I think will be ripe for the work that we're doing collectively. And there's these corporate actions that happen every so often where we may not be able to provide that same level of automation. Now we'll get there at some point, but it's hard. And as you know, we have been trying through our efforts to tokenize our assets within DTCC. We're looking to process corporate actions on chain. And let me tell you, out of everything that we've done so far, it's proving to be the hardest component of what. So the work that we've collectively done with the community gets us a step forward. But there's still a lot of work to get us there. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that, because I could see people, listening to this and going like, what are these guys thinking, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge that we're on a journey, right? And I think blockchain, smart contracts, the oracles, just get us a step forward to doing that. But you're spot on, Sergey, with how you denominated the technology and how you've outlined that.
It's like the perfect fit between technology and the problem, right? It doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
It is a data problem. You need data you need a single version of the truth of the data. That's where blockchains come from. You need the AI to actually make sure that the different parts of the chain are actually computing the right data. And then all the Oracle networks are making sure that the data that is going into this chain is not crap. Because before we tried this in the past, when blockchains were initially being tested, and you only had crappy data going into these chains. With the Oracle network, you can validate the data that goes, and then you know that it's reliable. And to Nadine's point, it's a problem that it's so massive that people don't even realize it. In our network, we can see how many connections an asset manager has, and that means how many different sources of a corporate action data they can receive. A big asset manager, let's say a tier 1 asset manager, will have about 150 custodians for one corporate action. So that means that for one event, they can receive 150 different flavors of that same event, even with the same standard. So it doesn't mean that they're using different standards. They're using the same standard, but they have different interpretations of the data. So as an asset manager, I receive this information from 150 custodians. Who do I trust before I take a decision to reply yes or no, or to choose one option versus the other? It's a massive problem. It's a very boring problem, but it's a massive problem.
And John, to your point, they have to spend time and energy to reconcile all that. So, which then forces very early cutoffs. So for a fund manager, it's a little bit, it's at a disadvantage, because you can't, ideally you want to give them as much time as possible to be able to vote that corporate action, but you can't, because you've got to reconcile it. Think about through the chain. You get that data, the custodian reconciles, the fund manager reconciles, right? And there's reconciliations happening. So that's why technology, as I said earlier, allows us. But and I think we've all said that, among everything that we do throughout that whole life cycle of a trade, corporate actions is where you have the most difficulties, the most manual, most fragmentation, and the most expensive when we make an error.
That's true even for very simple corporate action, because there is a complex one and also voluntary one. But even for simple, it creates a lot of friction and reconciliation within the industry. So that's why it's super interesting to see that. And the value, what I liked in your question was about the value, and the most exciting part in terms of technology, the fact that we had all the idea to have all this LLM model there to create the golden record. It's super interesting. The quality of the data and how you create it make it super interesting. And then using the smart contract and the ability to define this multi-party workflow, because inside the corporate action, once it's created, it's not complete at the beginning. You still have to enrich it with some information coming either from the issuer CSD or data vendor to fix the rate, and you are able to do that and do that collectively once for all for the industry, thanks to the Oracle and the smart contract. So I think it's really a nice way of demonstrating that.
I'm hearing a lot of similar ideas from all of you, that the quality and the accuracy of the data going into the standard is very important. That validation of data problem historically is unsolved. I think you totally agree with you that the combination of AI and the ability to get consensus on multiple AIs using Oracle networks is definitely an innovative approach. The way I see it is that we've taken what's called unstructured data. So a lot of this data, as you know, is inside of PDFs, newspapers, all kinds of places where it's not in a computer readable format. And so the AI and the Oracle network model turns the unstructured data into this highly validated and structured data. So I think that's the first value. I think the second value that you and others have all agreed is valuable within this phase one, but now even more so in phase two, is that there is a single record and there's a single place to get the record, which is where blockchains, uniquely provide a lot of value. And that's where I think you definitely need a set of standards, because everyone has to agree how to access that record, what is that record, how do they read from that record. And then the final thing, which I think will become more and more important, is that I think the corporate action record will be read not only off-chain, but it'll be read more and more on-chain. So there will be more and more, to Nadine's point, tokenized public equity, tokenized assets of different types that want to access the corporate actions record on-chain. And then all those different tokenized assets, we all, I think, already agree, are going to be on many different chains. So now you need a way to get all the different chains to access the on-chain corporate action record, which was the third innovative part of this phase two that I think we really expanded. The other thing that I thought was also very, very innovative was how the corporate actions information could be transmitted back into the SWIFT ISO 20022 standard, which goes to your point, Nadine, about the existing universe of standards being able to benefit from the blockchain work and all those things. So I'm super excited. It sounds like you folks definitely see value. I think the growth in the amount of participants shows a lot of value.
And we are getting ahead of the problem because, we've been focusing on the last 2 years on issuance of tokenized assets. Then at some point you're going to have settlement on secondary markets of tokenized assets. Then you're going to have distribution. You're going to have, we have projects on fund tokenization, etc. Who is going to solve the asset servicing problem? That's going to come, right? So getting ahead of that is important, right?
John, we're in the middle of this, as you know. So DTCC is, at least for the US markets, right? We're working right now, waiting for our approvals from our regulators. But our ambition is to tokenize most of the assets in the US market. But we also have a duty to ensure that investor protection is thought through, which is corporate actions among that. As you know, NASDAQ just filed a couple of weeks ago. So secondary issuance is coming as well. So these are all, this is no longer an if, but a when. The work that we're doing here collectively gets us somewhere. But corporate actions technology is a big enabler. But I think, this is my personal opinion, it's the only place where institutional memory is also really important, just because of the clusters of, there's corporate actions we see once in a generation that you don't want, that a smart contract would be very hard to manage. And that's why, among everything that we do, I would say we need to proceed here with caution and with purpose as we move that forward. So the technology enables, but there's still a boatload of work that goes around that to ensure that, it's not just the data, but the processing gets into the system. Being able to pump it through SWIFT is a big advantage, Sergey, as you've said. because it's got tentacles in the
All
entire
over the place. Yeah.
life cycle of that trade, which one needs to proceed with caution with.
And what is interesting is indeed all the work that we are doing here will be there as a foundation for when everything is tokenized and what you are mentioning, but it is valid for the traditional assets as well. We can definitely use this kind of streamlined workflow even if the assets continue to be issued traditionally. And so it's solving a problem not only for the future, but it could be also solving a problem which is a real concrete problem of today.
What will be the effect of this if it becomes, highly successful and ubiquitous, right? So we're at 24 participants now, lots of really big financial market infrastructures, asset managers, top banks. There's clearly an interest in solving this problem. There's clearly a need for global standards. There's clearly a need for the financial market infrastructures of the world to help bring along their user base in a way that the user base is comfortable, that the risks are properly managed, which is the main thing I think that FMIs do, is they assure everyone that risk is being managed correctly for transactions and for systems. So let's say this is successful, right? Let's say there is a good standardized way. You create a unified golden record. And I want to hear from kind of each of you. What do you think is the effect of that existing on both the traditional financial industry and separately on the digital asset industry? So if this is a success and this ends up becoming a real thing, Nadine, what do you feel will be the impact on digital assets and on the TradFi industry?
Sergey, I would say it will be successful. The question is how big and large and how much of that process will it cover? Because I think John said it earlier, it's not our first rodeo as an industry, right? Like we have been at this, and I'm sure at some point we'll talk about in a different setting KYC and AML, which is another thing where we all do exactly the same thing for different reasons. So I think the impact will be felt. So first of all, we do need to get the community, and it's going to be more than 24 participant, but I think we've got a bit of critical mass to have we can use our imagination to figure out how that would look. But once we can get critical mass and do that, I think the impact would be on digital first, because we do need to figure out a way to be able to do corporate actions at scale for tokenized assets. So I think that's the first step, but we still have, to your point, we're all in the risk management business. I'm not quite sure we fully understand what it means. We technically figured this out. What we now need to figure out is what are the risk implications of it working, or the problem is it's the exception when it doesn't work, right? Like, is that we need to think through these consequences and do that. So I think we still have a long way to do that. At some point, I think it could be beneficial for the TradFi side of it, because at least what we're looking at to do at DTCC is ideally we would have to have one process that covers both TradFi and digital, but we're still ways away from doing that.
So you feel the digital asset
probably be the first beneficiary. Yeah,
will be the first big beneficiary.
That's my gut.
That's your guess. Okay.
But we still have lots and lots of work to do.
And the TradFi industry will then also benefit from it once you standardize it on chain?
Yes, because I gotta believe all three of us, at least from our perspective, we want to be able to service and handle digital assets with the same care and attention as we do traditional assets, right? So in order to do that, you want to try to streamline the processes as much as you can. There'll be differences in the way the attention we have to give to these records on TradFi is harder because we don't have the same technology benefits and so on. But the bigger issues in my head is, like, what is that risk assessment? I don't think we've done that. And most importantly, you expect it to work all the time, but the biggest problem is what happens when it doesn't work.
Right.
And I don't think we've made it that far yet.
Who provides the support for that? How is that error handled?
Where's that one throat to choke, right? Because when you do have, and it's not the blockchain, right? Like, blockchain doesn't look good in orange, or right? You still need a party that's going to be the accountable party when something breaks. Who's going to administer all this stuff? Who's going to ensure that it's in sync? So there's a lot of unanswered questions still, but don't get me wrong, this is furthest than we've ever been in trying to, and it's, thanks to the work that Chainlink has done in bringing together the leadership and using, your data savvy approaches to all that. So it's probably a step
beyond that
we need to go. So I wish I could tell you we're ready to go to production. I think we're a long way from doing that.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting place where the technical problems are solved.
Yeah.
I think we've shown that with this phase 2. I completely agree with you that there's another level of problems of who are the FMIs, who are the groups that are going to deliver this service, stand behind it, using this technical approach. I'll tell you folks what I think, who's going to benefit sooner and now. I don't want to bias anyone. But Stephanie, would be thrilled to hear your views. Let's say this is a big success. Let's say, you know, this goes to production and there's a lot of corporate actions on chain now. You know, they're validated very well. They're available to the digital asset community. They're available to traditional finance community. You know, what do you think the impact of that is on those two user groups?
Just to come back first to Nadine's point, I think the liability question is really key and something that we will have probably to address to the next phase, because as we remain at the experiment level, this is not really addressed, and that will be what will really drive the adoption at scale of this kind of new solution. Now, I get the point of Nadine saying it's first digital assets. And I think it really makes sense for digital assets. We need to have a solution which can make and work at scale, and we can use the opportunity to build a new process from scratch without legacy, in a sense, and that's really interesting. I still like the idea of that it can solve actual problem for the traditional assets short term as well, provided we solve the accuracy problem, the liability problem.
It works correctly.
Yes, in your world, in your idea.
We shouldn't put it on production.
Exactly.
We should keep it off production.
Yeah, and then if you do that, maybe not globally, but at least on some pocket of assets in some jurisdiction, you can try to solve this issue and solve it at scale. And because it's for traditional assets, indeed you have you can solve the problem. And because it's integrated, interoperable with SWIFT, it can go into the custodian system very easily. So I can see a path to scale and a path to production that will provide a lot of value at different stages. First, to support the acceleration of the settlement cycles, because if you remove some of the hurdle you have in terms of reconciliations and discrepancies of data, it will support that. That's for sure. And then if you combine that with the new way of setting all the activities and the development you had on the cross-border payments activity using stablecoin or other type of digital cash, I can see some value as well for the next step, which would be the execution of the proceeds for the corporate actions.
Sergey, I think the question is going to be, and I don't know if you guys agree, is I don't know what we need to do collectively to convince a fund manager or TA or custodian that the validation of a node of an oracle is enough. Like when you look at the work we do today to scrub the data, to ensure that it's accurate. So there's an element of trust and comfort that needs to come out of this. And I don't know if as an industry right now, because of the liability, right? We like the industry writes very large checks when something goes wrong. So the question is, what level of comfort do we need to reach before they can feel comfortable that the attestation of the oracles in the smart contracts are enough? And I don't know the answer to that.
And I had this discussion this morning with another participant to the PLC, and should we talk about golden record? Is it really the golden, or is it another source which is trustable enough so that we can compare what we have in our system and making sure that it is and then it is fixed once for all for the industry if there is any discrepancy. So I think there is a lot of discussion to have to see how trustable we can be.
Yeah, I definitely have views on how cryptographically proving that the validation was done in a certain way reaches a new level of proof that wasn't previously achievable, so that everyone can verify how the validation was done, and that previously they had to rely on third parties and trust the third parties, whereas now technology can do that validation in a way where not only is the result viewable, but the validation is verifiable and viewable. So you get a lot more information than just here's the answer. You get proof of what the answer is and why that's the answer. But I really want to also hear John's views. So John, if this is all successful, let's assume we can do it, right? Let's assume the AIs and the Oracle network consensus and the blockchain networks and the smart contracts, let's say they all achieve their intended goals. And let's say the validation of the corporate action happens in a way where, you can prove to the recipient what the answer is and why it's the answer. What steps you went through, how you did it, and that will meet their highest possible standard. So let's say it's successful not only in the sense that it's on production, but in the sense that we've made it so reliable and so trust minimized that the participant, I understand the problem you're laying out. It's the right problem. It's definitely the right next problem. But I want to hear John's views. Like, what if we solve all those problems? What do you think is the impact on the digital asset industry and the TradFi industry? Which of those industries benefit and how do they benefit?
I would say the first thing for this to be successful is that it needs to have a big ambition, because it cannot be a solution among others. It's a crowded space. And as Nadine said, we've been long enough trying to solve this problem. So you can imagine the number of people that are trying to solve it: companies, data vendors, technology providers, and there's a whole market of solutions to try to solve these inefficiencies. If this solution becomes one among a bunch, I don't think anybody will be interested. It needs to be something that actually rules them all. That's the ambition, right? You can always scale back, but it needs to have an ambition to say, let's solve this problem once and for all. So for me, that's number one. Now, the second thing is that if you prove that you can do this, then you can start thinking about other parts of the capital markets that could also benefit. SSIs is a big problem where you could use the same thing. What else? Yeah, NAVs, which is something that you've done together with DTCC also in the past. So there's many other businesses that are heavily reliable on data that can actually benefit from the fact that you prove that the technology works.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you, John. I think corporate actions is one category of data. There's a lot of different pieces of data, reference data, valuation data, price data, all kinds of data. And the complexity of how the capital markets have to deal with data is very multi-layered, because it's not like in public chains where one piece of data is enough. To do a transaction, as you all well know, you need 3, 4, 5 pieces of data. And I completely agree with you that if we can successfully prove this for corporate actions, and we can successfully address these concerns about the trustworthiness and the accuracy and the reliability of the record, and to all of your points, I completely agree there has to be a single, one standard to rule them all about how this works, because people already have, as you explained, John, 150 sources of corporate actions data. They don't need 150 first. What they need is a golden source of truth that meets a higher standard. And to your point, Nadine, Stephanie, I absolutely agree that you also need an organization that's going to deliver the guarantees around that being accurate, the liability, all of these open questions. I feel like in phase one, we got a lot of initial interest in this. We kind of validated the market interest. In phase two, we were able to prove out that the technical problems can be solved, and that the solution of those technical problems is something that I think can meet the high standard of the asset manager and the bank and the financial market infrastructure to be relied upon, so the record can be relied upon. I think the third and final question is indeed, how is that technology implemented, right? How does that get launched into a working global standard? How does that global standard interoperate with existing global standards like the SWIFT ICO 2002 standard? How does that global standard work within large securities markets like the US market and the schema and the way that works? How does that standard work in the European market? How is that relied upon? How do those standards work, and who delivers that? I think there's definitely a big next step here. But I also think, and this is my answer to the question of the digital asset market versus the TradFi market, I think the digital asset market will push the urgency of doing this, because I think public equity and various other things that are getting tokenized need a reliable corporate action solution, just like they need a reliable NAV solution and other solutions like the ones that John has mentioned. I think that will create a kind of immediate urgency that hasn't historically existed. I think there will also be used for this in the TradFi world, where there will be more and more realization that blockchain-based records are reliable. And so I think as you have the blockchain-based records get used more and more by digital assets, I think people will ask themselves in the TradFi world, well, it looks like these folks in the digital asset world, it seems like they cracked this problem. It seems like this problem's a solved problem now. And I think once they see that working for the digital asset community, I think they'll be impressed, because they'll see the efficiency and the benefits and the reliability that the digital asset community is experiencing for corporate actions and NAV and these other pieces of data relative to all the reconciliation, errors, delays, and problems in the TradFi world. And I think the TradFi world will then start to say, how do I apply, this system to the TradFi problems? But to everyone's point, I agree. I don't know if it'll be driven by the TradFi folks first. I think they have existing solutions, but I think the digital asset industry is really an opportunity to consider how all of this works again.
Agreed. I think the TradFi side needs to be heavily involved, because that's where the expertise is, that's where the knowledge is. And what we've got to figure out collectively is, how do you leverage now? I mean, what you've helped us achieve here is a great platform. The question is, how does it fit in now with our processes? When you look at the US market, right, and any other market, there are huge numbers of volumes and corporate actions and things like that. So we've got to understand, and as I said before, I'll go back, we've got to understand a risk assessment, we've got to understand how it fits in with our processes, because I don't know how, but I know there's a way. And I would agree that's probably in the next steps that as an industry we need to collectively start to think through that.
Right. John, any final points?
Just how do we take this to the next level?
Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be collaborating with all of you and your great organizations. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this important problem. I think it's a really important, expansive problem that we need to solve. And to everyone's point, I'm really excited to see what the next steps are. How does it get productized, commercialized? I think, however quickly it happens, I think we're at the point where that's the open question now that we need to solve as an industry and as the folks in this, really collaborative approach that we've been doing all of us together. So just want to thank you again for sharing your views. My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for all the collaboration. Looking forward to finding a way to solve this together as a global financial community. So thank you. Thank you very much.